So, bro, how much did you guys say you raised again?
We raised around 16,000.
Okay, cool. So what are you guys doing with the money?
So we've broken it down into two parts. The first one is our school campaign, where we're giving out about 500 packages out to kids. Those packages have some journals, some pens, some prompt questions, and a shoot bag. And the second part is our social media campaign, where we're working with creatives like yourselves, with a couple of podcasts. We're having a Twitter room where we're having professionals involved in that as well, alongside the shoot team, where you guys can come in and obviously have a conversation and stuff like that. Am I missing anything, Scully?
Come hop on if there's something to
Jump on.
Do you think? You guys will probably know this familiar face. We've done an episode with it.
Was good. Thank you boys for having me and Omar and Nivanka. It was a pleasure to have you guys a part of this campaign. Just to kind of like reinstate what Omar's already said so eloquently, basically it's been split into two parts, right? So the first part is the school program. So we're going across schools all across Melbourne, and we're going to be giving to almost 500 kids a shoot package. And in that package, like Du said, Omar, was a backpack, a USB, a pen, a journal, and inside that journal we'll have prompt questions with a card as well, with resources to local help if you need some type of assistance, as well as what we call a creative pamphlet. Now in this creative pamphlet is going to have QR codes to our YouTube channel and all these playlists. So there'll be a playlist for editing, there'll be a playlist for photography, there'll be a playlist for engineering, there'll be a playlist for basketball. All these different creative playlists will be there on YouTube for anyone to reach out to. It's also going to be public for anyone else. There will also be QR codes, maybe not QR codes, but Instagram links to our local creatives. For example, they will be having podcasts. So Ferdinkin will be on that creative pamphlet, as well as film photographers, engineers, editors, DJs, and all that. Because growing up, there's a couple of things of why the team was so solid on this. Because growing up, right, we thought, and I thought personally, America was the place to be because we didn't have anything televised except for Around the Twist in Australia, right? Yeah. And I'm not going to relate to Around the Twist, bro. I didn't even hear about Talkie until I was like 15, 16, right? So, even like basketball, I was like, I want to go to America. I want to be either an actor, like I said in the last podcast, or I want to be an NBA player. But now, if we can see, hey, yo, look, there's people who do film photography or journalism that makes it cool, like myself, that makes it look like it's something that's cool to do, or podcasting or basketball, like to hoop, like there's dope hoopers in this area in the scene that we don't know. So if we were to have like a link or show these kids this is what we're doing in the area, then it will make kids be like, yo, I'm proud of where I'm from, I'm proud of what I do, and I don't have any hesitation or, I'm not unconfident with it. So that's why we're doing that and the shoot package, as well as the journal and the prompt questions. For me and a lot of people such as Omar, journals helped me engage with myself and understand me. Now, I could be really happy to talk to Nivanka, by the way, right? But when it comes down to it, I may not tell her what my true addictions are, you know what I mean? But I will tell myself that because only I know. So that journal is for you to answer, and that's why we had these prompt questions to kind of get you going. Like, a letter to your future self. What's your thoughts on this? How do you get support? What do you like to do in these type of situations? So that gets the ball rolling for them. It got the ball rolling for me when I was 20 or 19. Imagine that when someone's 14, 15. They're going to develop that emotional intelligence so much more earlier. And, they might be that person that will help their friend during a situation. I can't really tap into that. But if I'm emotionally intelligent and Omar may not know and understand the situation, I'm the one that can help him out, and he'll listen to me more than, for example, Nivanka or someone else.
Exactly.
So that's what we're doing with the schools and the campaign,
One last question though. What's the future of Shoot?
I mean, I think Deuce can say his piece.
Yeah, it's looking bright, man. It's looking bright. Everything is looking bright for us. We're not stopping.
Sure.
There's been little setbacks, but we're coming back stronger, harder, and everything's working out for us. Everything's working out for the people around us, and it's a learning process, and we're going to see where every day takes us.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Thank you guys for coming on. Guys, make sure to like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. Any last words, Swale?
Also, make sure you support the brothers. You can obviously tell they're very passionate about what they do. And when people do good work, make sure you go and support them so they can continue to do good work for generations to come, inshallah.
And break the cycle. Break the
Allah
cycle.
help you boys, inshallah.
sometimes when people have been through kind of traumatic experiences, and when we say like traumatic experiences, it's not like sometimes these huge things like a car accident, or it's not necessarily like that, but it's like the everyday traumas. Like, for example, if you're growing up in Australia as a man of color or a woman of color, the everyday little experiences you have of like racism, discrimination, othering, those are like micro traumas that add up over years and years. And rather than thinking and reflecting on those experiences, some people can just be like, I just need to get on with my life.
Yeah. And in regards to like Foundation House, just so, because obviously first time I heard of Foundation House was through the boys at Shooter Shoot and stuff.
Yeah.
What services do Foundation House provide, and what do you guys do exactly?
Yeah. So Foundation House is a service for asylum seekers and refugees who have gone through torture and other traumatic experiences. And so when people are referred to Foundation House, our intake team will take a kind of a story about what they've been through and also what their needs are. And then there's lots of different services, but the work that I do, I work in the mental health clinic. So that means that in my day-to-day work, I see people who have been through these traumatic experiences, and sometimes it's about like they might need medications, or it might be just about kind of having a conversation about what they've been through, because I think it helps people to actually have a safe space to talk about what they've been through, have somebody listen, and try to understand. Yeah, so I do therapy and medication prescriptions. Yeah.
Does that stuff weigh heavy on you yourself as even like a psychotherapist?
Yeah, it does.
So when you leave the place, do you have to like compartmentalize, or what strategies do you use to kind of like leave all that stuff there?
Yeah, it is really hard. But I think what I really like about Foundation House is that even in the Brunswick office, just the office is really nice. Like you have a view out into the garden. So when you're talking, you can look at the trees and the birds, and it's very calming for you and your client. But I think afterwards, what really helps is that I don't work there full time. I work there 2 days a week. So in the days in between, I have kind of time to like process everything. And it's about, I think, having people in your life as well, who bring you joy and happiness, and having a life outside of work and finding like interests and hobbies outside of work.
You also see like paramedics. They don't work every day of the year. They have like 3-4 months, I think, where they're working, and they have like 6 months leave or something like that. So when you see like trauma on a daily basis, it could weigh heavy. So I just wanted to see like if somebody who has to deal with trauma, is at the front line of fighting it, like if you had strategies, then maybe that could impart some sort of like wisdom upon people who watch this podcast.
And I think another thing is also like I have my supervision. So like psychotherapists who are much more senior in the field, who I see weekly, and I get to kind of talk to them about the clients who I've been seeing, kind of the emotional response I'm having, and they help me kind of think through that. So that really helps.
100%.
So obviously you don't get lost in other people's conversations and stuff. Separate your lives from them. In regards to like the people that come to see you and stuff, is there like, obviously because there'd be a range of communities and stuff, is there a specific community that Foundation House like try and reach out to, or do you get all walks of life?
Yeah, I think it's all walks of life. I'm not aware of like any specific community.
For sure. And I was going to speak about in regards to the stigma of mental health, and obviously we've been seeing how like there's been a rise in the conversation of mental health in the last couple of years, or even like the last decade. I know when I was going through school, that conversation wasn't really that prevalent. What are some ways that like you can like introduce people to the conversation of mental health and like speaking up, because a lot of people don't realize the trauma that they go through unless they obviously see a psychotherapist. I was going to ask, so what are some ways where people can open up to that conversation and make it easy?
Yeah. I think it's just about, I think someone's got to break the silence. Someone's got to be the first one, you know. So it's, even though it's hard, and I think COVID lockdowns have really opened up that conversation, because people in mass was talking about kind of how the isolation was impacting on their mental health. So I think amongst your friend groups, if that is not a conversation that you're having at the moment, like I think, and if you feel like, you know, there are things that you're going through and you think that other people are going through the same thing, but you're not having that conversation, I think, you know, just starting, just being like, oh, you know, like, you know, you guys, like, things have been tough recently, and just seeing how other people react, because often when someone goes first, other people are like, okay, maybe it's like okay to talk about this, and then they can share as well. Yeah.
Do you have a method to separate? Because obviously we know that there's something called a bad day. Every human being has those, you know, and a lot of the times people have a bad day, and they can kind of associate that with something a little bit more serious. Or if not, vice versa, you know, somebody's just thinking a bad day is just, it is what it is, and I'll move on tomorrow, I'll wake up, I'll be different, but it doesn't change. Is there anything that you can categorize, for example, depression or anxiety, in comparison to somebody just having a bad one, you know?
Yeah. I think that's such a good question. And I think what you said, like a bad day, you know, with depression, it's not a bad day. It's bad weeks, bad months, bad years. You know, it's like the same sense of, you know, like feeling, I don't know, you might feel like bad about yourself, worthless, having trouble getting out of bed, not feeling like you can eat anything, like all these things stretching out for like weeks and months and years. And yeah, so it is about that, but it's also about kind of how serious it can get in terms of like whether, and this is a very serious conversation, but people having thoughts about ending their life, about self-harming, like those kind of things are quite serious. And yeah, if these things are happening, it's important people get professional help. Yeah.
Sorry, but there's also this this concept of autopilot, or staying in autopilot for a while, like not really just sitting and like in sorrow or anything, but more so just kind of going through the motions of life. And we noticed that with people around our age. I don't know if you boys are all 24ish, 25ish, somewhere in that range. Like something that, like when especially a male, they get through to that age, they start to turn into like kind of like a robotic mechanical system that just continuously functions the same. Like does that categorize itself in that regard as depression or anxiety, or?
So it's almost like what you're describing is like a numbing response. People just like feel emotionally numb. They just go through the emotions every day, but they don't really feel anything. So I think if it is that, it is important to, I mean, this is a really complicated conversation, because like, you know, how we draw the line between what is abnormal and what is normal, it's like such a gray area, and it shifts depending on the culture. So I think if you do feel like that you're going through autopilot and you just feel emotionally numb, I would say that there are things, there might be things in your life that you're not really trying to forget about and push back and not think about. And I would kind of think, for people like that to really try to reflect why they are like that, why they feel emotionally numb, and, you know, try to think whether going to a psychologist would be helpful, where they have an opportunity to talk about things that they've been through.
What are some reasons why people would feel like numb in regards to that?
I mean, it's so dependent and variable. But, you know, sometimes when people have been through kind of traumatic experiences, and when we say like traumatic experiences, it's not like sometimes these huge things like a car accident, or it's not necessarily like that, but it's like the everyday traumas. Like, for example, if you're growing up in Australia as a man of color or a woman of color, the everyday little experiences you have of like racism, discrimination, othering, those are like micro traumas that add up over years and years. And rather than thinking and reflecting on those experiences, some people can just be like, I just need to get on with my life, and people just push all those things back, and that is the way they have learned to cope with them.
Like the reaction we give, for example, I can speak only for myself, for experiences with like my beard and stuff like that going out. Like you'll get the occasional glance, like, come on, man, look at this bloke, like, and for us, when we kind of like go out of the house to kind of go about our business, we don't really expect to gain some sort of friction from people you never met before, and then so you're saying that micro traumas do exist. So for example, even getting the odd glance or the odd like greaser or that sort of stuff actually adds up to kind of like frustrate you further.
Because it's cumulative, right? Like it adds up. And also, like, if you think about what it means, right? This other person is basically othering you, and you like feel like you don't belong, and you feel sort of disconnected, and that feeling of not belonging over time can be really like very distressing.
So when those things do occur when you're outside and stuff like that, what's a couple of steps or little tricks that you can do to just calm yourself down, understand that it might just be a bad day? I know one of them that I personally use is the 5x5 rule. So if it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes worrying about it. That's something that's helped me a lot throughout the years. But what's some tricks or tips from you?
I think it's about kind of having a really good way that you are prioritizing your well-being, like every day, rather than like something happen and then you try to do something. Just like routinely build kind of good well-being into your daily life. So it's like, you need to look after your body. So having a good sleep routine, having a good diet, having a good exercise regime, but also like having ways to connect, that may be connecting to yourself through hobbies, but connecting to your family, connecting to your friends, connecting to your community. Like, for example, what you guys do, like, this podcast, I can imagine that it's your way of like connecting to your community,
For sure.
And that gives like some sense of meaning and purpose. So I think that's really important when you feel like, okay, these people are othering me, but I have so much in life that connects me to people and brings me joy. So I think that's what I would say is important. Rather than reacting to things, you just build a very good like mental well-being routine into your daily life every day.
In regards to the conversation about trauma as well, and you know how you were speaking about like micro trauma in regards to small things happening over a period of time that you don't attend to or give notice to, can that be also the same with like trauma that's out of your life? For example, like past your experiences, like let's just say your family's experiences and whatnot. Because I know for most of us, like we're all first generation, second generation, what do you call it, Australians living here. And obviously some of us have come from war-torn countries, parents being refugees and all that kind of stuff. Exactly. Can those be things that affect our lives as well?
Yeah, definitely. I guess here we are kind of talking about intergenerational trauma. So yes, like, what your parents, even grandparents, great-grandparents, what they've been through, it can all be passed down. And it's like the way that it's passed down. Some people are like, oh, like how can trauma be passed down through the generations? And it's not necessarily, like the traumas that our parents been through. We are not directly experiencing that trauma, but what we are experiencing is how our parent was left with after that trauma, so they might be more anxious, more depressed, more withdrawn. It might have, what they've been through might have affected their ability to parent, you know, to be like emotionally available, to, you know, praise your child, to like all these things that they, you know, has impact, like because of the trauma, their life has been impacted in that way. And so because of that, the next generation is affected because they didn't get those things from their parent. So now, you know, if we are not very conscious of that, that can pass on to the next generation in how we parent our children. So it's, so
that's sort of different to the information that's out there saying that like depression can't be like sort of inherited and whatnot, or like, I guess mental health issues can't be inherited. Because I was reading this book recently that I started, and it was titled "It Didn't Start With You." And it was speaking about how a lot of the things that like a lot of trauma or like mental health issues can start even 3 generations before you. You know, because like in regards to your mother's mother, so your grandmother, because she's born with all her egg cells and whatnot, that she's going to have all her life, or that basically led to your mother's birth, and that also led to your mother's birth. And it was speaking in regards to how that can directly affect you. And one of the ways that they said in order to address those mental health issues, or let's just say you're traumatized by some certain thing, is to have that conversation with your parent, you know. And I feel like within like families, like first generation families and all that conversation is sort of not had, you know, like everything is swept under the rug.
Exactly.
And what avenues would you say that would help in regards to opening that conversation with parents?
I think it first starts with, this is really hard, I think, especially for migrants, because, you know, like our parents and how we are can be quite different in terms of the lives that we've had and the environments that we've grown up within. So there can be like almost this communication barrier.
And cultural as well, because they've grown up in, like I know my parents, for example, they've grown up in Somalia. And then obviously like the Australian way of life is completely different to the Somali way of life, you know. So they'll see me doing certain things and it's like, you can't address it because it's 2 different livelihoods, you know?
Exactly.
Sorry to cut you off, but
No. It is really tough. But I think like trying to understand, and this is really, really difficult, but I think you need to find a space in your heart to be like, you know, I'm going through really difficult things, but my parents are too. And someone needs to make the first step in kind of trying to bridge this divide. So I would say like find something that, you know, you and your parent can enjoy like together. That might be like a good example of that. I think might be food, right? Because sometimes even though culturally, you know, we have grown up very differently, a lot of the time in the home we are still eating the same cultural food. So having a conversation with food over the dinner table about, you know, like what you said, you know, you have been reading this book and you've learned these things and you're really interested to understand what your parent has been through. And, you know, and even acknowledging, you know, I know that we don't talk about this stuff and we rather push it to the side, but, you know, I'm an adult now and I really want to understand my family's history and my family's story, because that would help me. And if you feel comfortable, I would like to know. And, you know, they might not want to share, but at least you've made that first step.
For sure.
Is there a way to, because I'm guessing this stuff all works towards creating a default setting or a default reaction from parents or from us in general. Like if we don't work towards or consciously work towards improving ourselves in regards to, like, for example, like intergenerational trauma, like do you have any examples of intergenerational trauma like coming out? Like, for example, say the way you react to somebody talking to you in a negative manner or something like that. Is there examples of it?
I think it's like more that like so I can give you an example. So a parent who has been through trauma, right? They can the way they are in daily life can be quite like withdrawn, so they don't really share much emotions, and when their child expresses a lot of emotions, they don't know how to deal with that. It can be quite overwhelming for them, so they would rather say like, just like, why are you behaving this way, just, you know, just like shut up, and like all these kind of things to kind of put them down. And so what happens to the next generation is that they learn that it's not good to express emotions, so they themselves will push their emotions aside, and so when they grow up, they are now adults who don't know how to express emotions, who find emotions just overwhelming. So when they parent, it's like it keeps going on,
continuous,
cycle repeats
until someone breaks that cycle,
until someone does,
and sort of has that conversation. So how do you spot like intergenerational trauma, like Sohail said, in regards to differentiating between having a bad day or like having like specific like depression that's just because of you, or let's just say having mental health issues that was because of past generations? How do you sort of tell the difference as a psychiatrist?
I think we almost don't, in the sense that it's like multifactorial, you know, like, so when we look at a person, we know that they are not like an island onto themselves, you know, their life has been so impacted by, you know, the family they grew up within, the school environment, the broader like national political conversations. So all these things have affected them. So we almost would look at each of the components. So almost everyone would have intergenerational, you know, trauma in some ways.
Can that come out in things like stress? So for example, I know, or I can only speak for my own mum, but I think every ethnic's mum has a problem with stress. Like just consistent like anxiety, and they're always like trying to keep everybody on their toes and stuff like that. Is something like that a result of intergenerational trauma, or is it just more so like a, how do I say it, more like a symptom of something else?
I mean, it can be both. So sometimes, you know, like because of intergenerational trauma, people can be quite sensitive or like predisposed to feeling more anxious with like little things, you know, because I mean, if you guys think about it, right, for our parents who have grown up in war-torn areas, like their safety was at risk, their life was at risk, their whole body was like primed to defend themselves and to protect them and their loved ones, right? And so sometimes even when people leave that situation and come to a safer place, their body is still reacting the way it was before when they were in an unsafe situation. So they don't quite like, I mean, they know that they are in a different place and they're safe, but sometimes their body is still reacting the same way.
So the changes that happen basically like sort of at a physiological level. So their body reacts and
exactly.
And then they carry that over until some sort of variable causes that stress,
Wow.
That's very, very interesting.
One of my ancestors must have had OCD, man. Because this thing is just killing me, buddy.
Because it reminds me of what I read in the book, because one of the tests that they done was like, when I was referring to like the 3 generations, they did a test on basically like a control group of mice and then obviously a test group, and they exposed the test group to shock, and they also they put the control group under shock. But every time they shocked the test group, they basically sprayed like cherry blossom scent with it. So then now basically what happened was the generation after that and the generation after that, whenever they were exposed to the scent of cherry blossom, they would have like an adverse reaction to it. And even though it has a positive smell to it, so that effect, every time they were induced with that stress, they reacted differently to it. So I guess it's the same with in regards to like racism and like in regards to coming from war-torn countries and that. You know? So that's quite interesting.
And it's like what you were saying, it just reminded me of this thing called epigenetic. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but it's this concept where kind of the way that, you know, your parents and your grandparents lived, what they ate, how much physical exercise they had, the, you know, emotional and physical stresses they had, all of those things affected like their genes and which genes were turned on which ones were turned off, and that is actually passed on down through the generations and can really so it's almost like intergenerational trauma is like emotionally and psychologically passed on through parenting, but it's also in your DNA.
So it makes sense why all Lebos are so angry.
Something just needs to be turned on for them to react.
I'm telling you.
But see, that's the thing, right? It's sometimes you can get into this trap of like, oh, you know, I'm this way because of my parents and my grandparents, and it's just like, this explains everything. But then, like, it's important to be like, yes, okay, like I might have some answers now, but what now? Like, you know, I can't just like pass it on down to the next generation. It's like my responsibility now to somehow heal myself so that I don't pass it down through the generations.
That's what I was saying about the default setting stuff.
Yeah.
Because you can always look at yourselves and go, you know what? I am the way I am. It is what it is. People got to deal with it, you know? You tell the boys around you, hey, don't push my buttons at this time because you're going to end up getting the wrong reaction. And then you look at yourself and you go, hang on, if I know that, why don't I do something about it?
Yeah.
So, which brings me to the next question. What do you suggest people to do in those situations? Use me as an example if you want, as an angry Lebanese boy.
Okay. I think it's important that you have some like thinking space. Like, you know, if you do think that you're an angry person, like, why am I angry? Like asking yourself that question, because anger, what is sometimes what we call like a secondary emotion. There's like, if you look back at anger, there's often a sense of sadness, shame, feeling like, you know, like things like just like really difficult emotions inside that, you know, anger is the outward face of that, you know. So it's like, it's important to look back and think, where is this coming from? Do I feel like I'm being othered? Do I feel like embarrassed? Do I feel like, you know, I'm hurt or sad or feeling vulnerable? What's going on? And then trying to, sometimes it's really hard to do that when you're like just on your own, you know. So that's why therapy really helps, because a therapist can help you think through that and to ask you those questions to help you think.
So a therapist's role isn't to provide you with the answer, it's more so for you to unpack your your baggage.
Exactly. I always tell, because sometimes people think, oh, you know, give me advice, give me answers. But it's more like you are like almost a guide, you know, like walking side by side with your patient to help them understand their experience and also their own solutions.
For sure.
Yeah.
So when can you like butt in? Because like what happens when, I guess, and I'm just thinking, like, let's just say someone wants to unpack a certain situation with you, and like, at what point are you not validating their feelings? Essentially, was what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You know, let's just say I present you with a certain problem and whatnot. You know how like you have guided responses, certain questions you can ask them to further unpack it.
Yeah.
Like, at what point do you tell them, no, you're sort of like wrong in that scenario? You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. So we never actually tell people like their emotion is wrong, right? Because people just feel emotions. So like, I think it's really important that like we always try to understand and validate people's emotions, like whether it's like anger or sadness or whatever it is important to be able to name that and to kind of say, you know, I maybe you were feeling angry, maybe you were feeling sad, and to really help the person understand their emotional experience. Because sometimes I feel like that's what society doesn't recognize and validate, people's emotional experience. So in the therapy room, you really like, emotion is at the center of things, you know. You really try to get the emotion out and validate it. It's the behavior sometimes that we need to challenge.
Gotcha.
You know, yes, you were feeling angry, but what happened? Why did you do this? What's a healthy way of expressing that emotion?
Gotcha. So you're not condoning Sohail for getting angry.
Yeah.
But basically you're condoning him for the way that he feels, essentially, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of, yes, your anger, you know, you were feeling angry and you were feeling this way. But what you did, how did you think it actually, like your behavior helped you? Do you think your behavior helped other people around you? What could you have done differently that did, you know, that would help you or would help other people around you? Yeah.
I think we spoke to a psychologist not too long ago on the podcast, and she was talking about the concept of the smaller self, so your younger self. Yeah, and like, for example, you were saying the secondary emotion is anger. Yeah. The only reason why is because you felt like the younger self was being attacked. Yeah. And the only way to protect it is you have like this layer of emotions, for example, anger, for example, sadness, depression, or like being I think con man was one of them as well. I'm not too sure, but like there's all these other aspects of emotions that you use as a crust to protect the inner layer, which is your inner younger self. So how would you bring about a conversation with somebody who, for example, your mate, you can tell he's starting to act out a lot. He's starting to be a type of way. And you really want to help them because you're like, you know what's going on, or you've at least think you know what's going on. Is it, do you tell them about this sort of stuff? Or do you kind of like tell them that what they're feeling is validated or knowledge?
I think it's really important like that you don't catch people in their like angry moments. It's like if people are like really angry and you're like mate and you try to have a conversation like in the middle of their anger, they won't be listening. You know. And instead it might actually make them feel even more annoyed. So I think it's important like when they are not angry to be like, hey, you know, like when you were like that before, like, you know, I don't know like what was going on, and like to try to do it when they are calmer and not kind of in the, you know, the throes of emotion. I think it's really important as a first step. But also to kind of be like, you know, like I said, like, you know, because anger is kind of secondary, to kind of actually think about like what was going on for you in that moment. Like, why do you think you got angry? And I think, guys, like sometimes it is a lot of, you know, personal, it does take a lot personally to help a mate like that. So if you are feeling like you are also getting overwhelmed with these conversations, it is important to understand your own limits, you know, and like, you know, direct them to like professional help, but also to get like help for yourself if you're feeling overwhelmed.
In regards to like help, is there a point in time where like you can't help a person? It sounds like a stupid question, I'll be honest, but like at one point, like is that where drugs come involved, where you sort of can't offer psychotherapy and then you offer them like an alternative, like actual drugs?
So it's that's a bit of a complicated question, because I feel like it's about there's always help, right? But it's the different types of help.
Gotcha.
So with like milder like depression and anxiety, therapy is really good and helpful, but sometimes people can get like their symptoms are so severe that they can't actually engage in therapy, right? Like they might be just like so sad they can't even keep a conversation, or they want to sleep all the time, you know. So in that case, it is important that we give that we think about medications, because medications can help them get to a stage where they can engage with therapy, right? So
it's more of like an opening to get the conversation started again.
Exactly.
That they wouldn't have otherwise. That's interesting.
And with the therapy as well, like we're not professionals, obviously, but I know that everyone in this room has had a friend or family member or someone that was suffering through stuff like depression and stuff like that, and was against therapy. What's some ways you would, that, you know, let's just say I had a mate that was going through that I would kind of guide him towards that, towards therapy, because obviously as a young man, it's very hard for you to go and be like, oh, I'm not okay. So
I think, that's such a good question. I think it's about, it's really hard because these things can be like ingrained in people over years, you know, so sometimes one conversation isn't going to do it. So I think it's about, you know, if you are having those conversations with your friends, saying like, you know, don't you think like when we chat like this, does it help you to tell someone what you're going through? Like therapy will be the same, you know, someone to talk to you, to help you think through these things. And so like one conversation like that might not help, but over time, if you keep having those conversations, your friend might change their mind. But even if they don't, I think it's really important to know that as a friend, you can only do so much. If your friend decides not to go through therapy, that is not your fault or your responsibility, right? Like, they are their own separate individual, and you have done your role in like supporting them and giving them resources. But, you know, like, don't take like too much, like, gosh, if something happens, like, you know, I think you need to be able, they are their own person. I've tried to help, but ultimately it is their decision.
When do you know it's like, okay, enough's enough, where it's not really going anywhere? Because I think a lot of people suffer with that, where you really want to help someone that you love and you care for, and you go over and beyond where it actually affects you as a person. So when do you kind of stop? Where's the little red light there? Or
I think when you recognize that, like, whoa, like, I'm becoming overwhelmed with this situation now, and to actually then get support for yourself, I think it's really, because like what you were referring to before about like bearing witness to someone's story, it's really emotionally tough, you know, because you're empathizing with their situation, and sometimes like what they've been through like kind of strikes similar chords in you, and you're like, gosh, my stuff is getting triggered now. So it's really important to, like, when you are being triggered, to recognize you're being triggered, and to kind of, you know, being like, okay, like, I think I need a bit of a break or a moment. I think I need my own help. And also, like, you know, if you're within a friend group, you know, like, you don't have to be the one who's always looking after people's mental health. You can just be like, okay, I'm going to step back. You know, you now try to help, you know?
Exactly. What are some tactics you use? Because obviously being in the mental health space and that, and obviously hearing about other people's story, it might be triggering for you sometimes. So what's some tactics that you use?
I think it's kind of like, having that awareness that you're being triggered. And also I think it really helps, like, in my field, like when I'm feeling strong emotions within myself, to actually question, like, whether this emotion is my own or whether it's something that's being projected into me by my client. So sometimes when people are feeling really sad or angry, like, and you know, we are human beings, like, sharing space, so you start to feel the same emotion. And so, like, when you do, actually using that to help your patient, because when you feel emotion, you can actually be like, are you feeling really angry right now, or are you feeling really sad right now? And they often agree. So it's sometimes a really helpful thing, like when you are kind of feeling really strong emotional reactions.
100%.
There's this I did a bit of research on, for example, habits that cause you problems. And because obviously going through my own things as a human being, one thing that I noticed was that a lot of the times your brain can only associate like chemical releases with actions. You know what I mean? It doesn't really know. It doesn't really know what is going on, but it knows that, like, for example, oxytocin gets released when certain things are triggered. And then what you do is, because your body doesn't know how to get the oxytocin fix again, it will consistently move towards doing that same thing because, you know, that sort of chemical reaction happens in the brain. Is it important that people kind of see it for what it is? Like, they separate the brain and the body, and then they go, okay, the only reason I'm thinking about doing something like this, I need to break the cycle, is because I need that fix. So I need to find alternatives instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's such a good question, I think, because it's about habits, you know, and like the autopilot thing you were talking about. When you're on autopilot, like, you just go through the motions and you just follow the same patterns. And because you're not actually thinking about what you're doing, you just go with sometimes going with the flow is very much like going on autopilot and just doing what you've always done. So I think to stop that, like, it's important to be aware and also to kind of have a pause between whatever the situation is and your reaction. You know, say like you're in a situation and someone says something and you automatically feel like you want to say something back, but you recognize you want to say something, but you don't say it, and you pause and you think, I want to say this right now, but is it like, would it be helpful? You know, and to have that gap or pause to think about what you're doing, because that is where you can actually change habits and change patterns.
Yeah, that's an important thing. I know, because we were speaking about it recently in an episode we did the other week. In regards to like the pause, it reminds me of a conversation we're having. It's like we don't allow ourselves to have like moments of silence or free time to actually like delve into the reason why we're feeling a certain way, or like I guess why certain cycles happen, because to a degree cycles are habits that have just passed on in generations. So I think that's a very, very helpful advice in regards to pausing and recognizing those emotions. And I guess if you can't understand it or you put a finger on it, then that's where I guess you seek therapy.
Exactly.
I know a lot of people nowadays as well, this is a common thing, like trauma bonding. You know, when they can't put a feeling onto why they're feeling a certain way, they go and discuss it, I guess, with the wrong person. You know, someone who's going through that same thing, and so then they start projecting to a degree, and then they end up getting the wrong answer, the wrong advice, and I guess they further go like deeper into their trauma.
That's why I don't listen to J. Cole.
A lot of rappers, to be honest. Because that's another form of trauma bonding as well.
It is,
you know,
really hard.
looking up to the wrong people, like role models and stuff. But I was going to ask a question in regards to what Sohail said about the brain. With intergenerational trauma, obviously, because you sort of don't have control over it. You know, you don't have control over the predisposed genetic factors that your parents went through. I was going to say, how does that affect the brain of younger people and growing up? Does that affect like brain development?
Ooh, I think this is a question I wouldn't be able to offer much detail in, other than to say that how a child grows up within a family, that really affects their brain development. For example, one of the things that might be an issue is that if your parents are very traumatized, if they are really withdrawn, they might not be able to really sit down with you, play with you, understand your emotions, name your emotions, just be that. And that might actually be like a form of neglect, when you're not getting that feedback and love and emotional reassurance, all those things. So, and neglect affects brain development, right?
Oh, it does?
Neglect does,
In what sense?
Because, the way that your brain forms throughout your toddler years, childhood and adolescence, you need stimulation for your brain to grow. It's when you're stimulated that your brain cells form like synapses and make connections. In an environment where you're not stimulated, it affects how the neural pathways in your brain is formed. So it's if you grow up in a very neglectful environment, and that might be emotional neglect as well, those synapses and pathways may not form to the same level as a person who got that emotional stimulation, So
say there's a kid 15 years old right now currently experiencing what has just been stated. They can kind of tell that their parents are they're neglecting their emotional well-being and all that sort of stuff. What advice would you give a kid who's 15? Like, would you tell them to go to a therapist? Would you tell them to maybe not seek validation in the wrong places, or what is it that you would?
I think I would first of all, I think I would try to kind of really empathize with their situation and what they are facing, and that this is really, really genuinely difficult. And I would encourage them to kind of, I don't know, yes, it might be really hard in the family environment, but seek connections outside of that, friends, hobbies, sports, things that they really enjoy. And I would say a service like Headspace, for example, which really kind of specialize in young people, and they have a really good website. And not only do they have kind of help that services that you can directly approach, but they have resources that they can read and educate themselves.
What's your thoughts on social media? So let's just say, going back to the whole neglect thing, obviously because they're not getting that validation or admiration from their parents, Do you think with the rise of social media that plays a big role in a lot of like mental health issues as well?
Yeah, it does. Like on like cyberbullying, and or I think it definitely does. And also like the pressure to be a certain way. This is like what's like socially accepted, and I think as teenagers, it's so prevalent, right? Like you want to fit in, and like to fit in, you have to look a certain way, sound a certain way, be a certain way. So I think, and social media perpetuate that image. But I think what I've also found really helpful about social media is that there are some really amazing like channels and where people are spreading awareness about mental health
issues.
So it can be both.
Exactly. It depends which way that you actually look at it. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you guys have any other things you wanted to delve into?
I think that's good.
I'm really happy with like having at least a connection with Shoot to Shoot and you guys, because I feel like there's a whole untapped community of kids who come from intergenerational intergenerational traumatically affected communities that have been neglected. And I feel like the best thing for us to do is at least shine a light on what they're going through.
Exactly.
And the best way to kind of like understand the problem is to understand that the problem is there to begin with, and to have that awareness. So we actually thank you for coming on, because honestly, like that, you shed light on some stuff that I didn't even know had existed, even though I went into my own kind of like mental health rabbit hole maybe a year or two ago during the lockdown. So thank you very much for coming on, honestly.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
And can I just say one last thing? I think like most of us are here from either from a migrant background ourselves, so our parents are. And I think we really need to recognize the history of the land that we live on, you know, and Aboriginal people's intergenerational trauma, like, you know, the history of colonization and dispossession and massacres and genocide, that they've been through so much, and they continue to, like, you know, Aboriginal youth are incarcerated at much higher rates. And I think so, as, you know, people of color, I think it's really important to be allies to Aboriginal people and stand in solidarity with them, because, you know, we live on their land.
Sure. And we might have not seen like the trauma that our like previous generations, like our parents and grandparents have felt, but I guess they're exposed to the trauma on a daily basis and stuff.
Exactly.
Well, this conversation's opened honestly a whole into a new galaxy for me. I say that's for sure. But yeah, like I said, thank you for coming on, and thank you for having Shoot to Shoot. Guys, make sure to like, share and subscribe. Is there some resources that if people do have questions, they can reach out to you on this topic?
What I might do is I'll put something together and I'll send that to you. Yeah,
send it to us. Yeah, exactly. Well, shoot us a DM, guys. Make sure like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. And yeah, get us to 10 likes. Happy birthday.
10 likes.